Kylie stood before the full-length mirror in her small bedroom, her hands smoothing over the soft fabric of her dress. Her belly remained flat, a subtle secret still hidden beneath the delicate floral pattern, despite the sweet little soul blossoming within her. The dress, with its pastel hues and gentle lace trim, draped elegantly over her frame, a tender disguise for the life she carried. Yet, as she gazed at her reflection, a heaviness sank into her chest, a quiet ache that clashed with the sweetness of her attire. Today was meant to be a pinnacle of joy, the day she would tell Nathan, the man who held her heart entirely, that they were going to be parents. And he did held her heart entirely. From the moment they'd begun dating, Nathan had been worth every sacrifice she'd made, and there had been plenty. It started back when they first met, during those early, uncertain days of their romance. Kylie had grown up in a modest home, raised by parents whose traditional values left little room for leniency, especially when it came to boys. Her father's stern gaze and her mother's quiet but firm lectures had kept her cautious, inexperienced in love until Nathan came along. She'd never been in a serious relationship before him, and perhaps that's why meeting him felt like a miracle, a gift wrapped in charm and kindness. To Kylie, Nathan was a winning lottery ticket, sweet, romantic, and endlessly caring, the kind of man she'd dreamed of as she doodled in the margins of her notebooks. They'd crossed paths in college, where the world still felt fresh and full of possibility. Kylie was a wide-eyed freshman, navigating the chaos of lecture halls and late-night study sessions, while Nathan, a confident sophomore, seemed to carry an effortless grace. She could still picture their first meeting, a crisp autumn afternoon in the campus courtyard, leaves crunching underfoot as he offered to carry her stack of books after she'd tripped over a loose cobblestone. "You okay there, Klutz?" he'd teased, his grin warm enough to melt her embarrassment. From that moment, their romance unfurled like a storybook, stolen glances in the library, coffee dates that stretched into hours and whispered dreams under the stars. For Kylie, it was everything she'd ever wanted, and she began weaving grand plans for their future together. But then, one grey afternoon, Nathan's voice trembled as he broke the news that shattered her idyllic vision. "Kylie, my family's moving," he'd said, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his jacket. "The business. It's struggling, and Dad needs me to step up. We're leaving town." She'd stared at him, her heart sinking as he continued, his brown eyes pleading. "I need you with me. Come with me, Kylie. We'll build something together, help my family, make a life. Please." The words hung between them, heavy and urgent. Kylie's mind raced. She had college, midterms looming, a scholarship she'd worked so hard for, a future she'd mapped out in meticulous detail. And her parents, what would they say? Her father's furrowed brow and her mother's tight-lipped disapproval flashed through her mind, but then she looked at Nathan, at the vulnerability in his face, the love she felt mirrored in his gaze, and her resolve softened. Convincing her parents had been a battle. "College can wait," she'd argued over dinner, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "I can always go back if I need to. This is about love, about supporting Nathan. Isn't that what matters?" Her father had grumbled, her mother had sighed, but eventually they relented, swayed by her determination and the promise that she'd return to her studies someday. A year later, Kylie found herself knee-deep in the chaos of Nathan's family business, a small hardware store teetering on the edge of collapse. She learned to balance ledgers, charm customers, and unload shipments alongside Nathan, their hands brushing as they worked side by side. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and oddly romantic, building something tangible together. Her parents, however, had other ideas. "Living with a man unwed," her mother had clucked over the phone, her tone sharp with disapproval. "Kylie Marie, you know better than that," her father had chimed in, gruff as ever. "Marriage first, young lady, that's the proper way." So, at their insistence, the wedding came quickly. A modest ceremony in a sunlit chapel, surrounded by family and the scent of fresh lilies. Soon, Kylie would face another sacrifice, one that would stretch the limits of her love for Nathan and force her to confront the shifting currents beneath their marriage. The night after their wedding, when the air still buzzed with the glow of their vows, they retreated to the cozy room above the hardware store they'd turned into their first home. The space was simple but theirs. Wooden beams overhead, a quilted bedspread from her mother, and a single lamp casting a warm amber light. Kylie's heart raced as she slipped into a soft nightgown, anticipating their first night together as husband and wife, a moment she'd dreamed of with a shy, hopeful blush. But as she turned to Nathan, his expression was taut, his brow furrowed in a way that dimmed the joy she'd expected. "Kylie," he began, his voice low and hesitant as he sat on the edge of the bed, still in his shirt and trousers. "I've been thinking. I'd like us to hold off on having kids, just for now." The words hit her like a cold gust, stealing the breath from her lungs. She blinked, standing frozen in the doorway, her fingers tightening around the hem of her nightgown. "What?" she managed, her voice small. "Nathan, why? We've always talked about a family, about kids running around, filling this place with laughter. It's what we wanted." He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her gaze as he stared at the worn floorboards. "I know we did. And I still want that, I swear, but not yet. We need to be smart, save up, get the business steady. I'm just not ready for it right now." He sighed, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his thoughts pressed him down. "It's not just about money, Kylie. We're still figuring things out. Marriage, the business, all of it. A baby's a big step. Can't we just enjoy being us for a little while?" His words sounded reasonable, practical even, but they clashed with the dreams they'd painted together. Late-night whispers of cribs and tiny shoes, of a little one with his eyes and her smile. She wanted to argue, to press him until the truth spilled out, but the earnestness in his plea softened her. Nathan had always been the steady one, the planner. If he thought they needed time, maybe he saw something she didn't. "Okay," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "If that's what you need, we'll wait." He squeezed her hand, offering a grateful smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks, Kai. I knew you'd understand." But she didn't, not really. As the weeks turned to months, Nathan deftly sidestepped any talk of children. When she'd mention a friend's new baby or linger too long in the aisle of tiny clothes at the general store, he'd change the subject with a quick joke or a distraction. The idea of kids drifted to the edges of her mind, a thought that only surfaced occasionally, startling her with how long it had been since she'd last considered it. But soon everything would come crashing down, and the dreams they'd spun together would face a reckoning she couldn't yet foresee. Kylie stood before the mirror in their cramped bedroom, the late afternoon sun spilling through the window and casting a golden glow across the floral dress she'd chosen with care. She placed her hand on her slightly rounded belly, the gentle curve just beginning to show beneath the fabric, and a soft smile spread across her lips. Her little secret, a sweet, fluttering life she'd carried silently until this day, filled her with a quiet thrill. Today she'd finally tell him. Her heart thudded in her chest as she moved through the evening, nerves buzzing beneath her skin. She wiped sweaty palms on her dress, waiting for the perfect moment. Nathan had been out in the shop all day, his sleeves rolled up as he hauled lumber and bantered with the crew. When he stepped through the door at dusk, dusting sawdust from his dark hair, her breath caught. He looked so handsome, broad-shouldered and steady, his confidence radiating in the easy way he carried himself. The sight of him, paired with the knowledge of the life growing inside her, made her pulse race. She couldn't tear her eyes away as he crossed the room toward her, his boots scuffing softly against the hardwood. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice trembling with anticipation as he reached her. "I need to tell you something." She glanced around. Their tiny apartment above the store was too open, too exposed. Gently, she took his hand and led him to the small storage room off the kitchen, where boxes of paperwork and spare tools lined the walls. The space smelled faintly of pine and ink, and the single bulb overhead flickered as she closed the door behind them. She turned to face him, her heart a wild drumbeat. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself, barely containing the excitement bubbling within her. "Nathan, I'm pregnant," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. She held her breath, eyes locked on his, waiting for the reaction she'd dreamed of. A grin breaking across his face, his arms sweeping her up to spin her around in a burst of shared joy. But the moment shattered. Nathan's face twisted, his brows knitting together as he recoiled, stepping back as if she'd struck him. "What?" His voice cracked, rough and disbelieving. "You're pregnant?" Kylie nodded, confusion creeping in like a cold shadow. "Yes, Nathan. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I thought it'd be a surprise. A good one." Her smile faltered, her hands instinctively cradling her belly. "Surprise?" Nathan's lip curled, his tone sharpening into something venomous. "You've ruined my life." The words slammed into her, a punch she hadn't braced for. She stood there, stunned, the air thickening around her as she struggled to process what she'd heard. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice fragile, barely audible. "I thought you'd be happy." "Happy?" Nathan's shout exploded in the small room, bouncing off the walls. He raked a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. "I'm not ready for kids at all. Didn't I make that clear from the start? I told you, we can't have kids yet. I don't want to be stuck babysitting, blowing money on diapers and all that crap." Kylie's knees weakened, and she gripped the edge of a shelf to steady herself. Her mind reeled, replaying his words from months ago, his gentle insistence on waiting, his promises of someday. She'd trusted him, believed he'd come around. "But we talked about a family," she said, her voice breaking. "You said you wanted it too, just later, I thought." "You thought wrong," he snapped, cutting her off. His eyes, once warm and tender, now blazed with a fury she didn't recognize. "This changes everything, Kylie. Everything I've been working for, gone, because you couldn't wait." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back, her shock giving way to a raw, aching hurt. "I didn't plan this alone, Nathan," she said, her voice steadying despite the tremor in her chest. "This is our baby. I thought we were in this together." He stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping as he glared at her, the silence between them heavy and suffocating. "Well, we're not," he muttered, turning toward the door. "Not like this." And with that, he walked out, leaving her alone in the dim room, her hand still pressed to the life they'd made, the life he'd just rejected. Tears streamed down Kylie's cheeks, hot and unrelenting, as she stared at Nathan through a haze of disbelief. The man standing before her, his jaw tight and eyes blazing with cold fury, was a stranger, a cruel, selfish shadow of the Nathan she'd loved so fiercely. The tender romantic who'd once traced constellations with her under a starlit sky, who'd vowed forever in a sunlit chapel, was gone. In his place stood someone unrecognizable, someone who'd just shredded her heart with a handful of careless words. The arguments came fast and fierce, erupting like storms neither could control. One night, as rain lashed the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, the tension boiled over. Kylie stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she tried to reach him. "Nathan, we can figure this out," she pleaded. "This is our baby. Ours. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" He spun to face her, his face twisted with frustration. "It means everything's ruined," he shouted, slamming a fist on the counter. The sound echoed sharp and final. "I told you I wasn't ready, Kylie. I don't want this. I never did. And now you've trapped me into something I can't handle." "Trapped you?" Her voice cracked, disbelief warring with the ache in her chest. "This isn't a trap, Nathan. It's a life, a family. I thought you loved me enough to see that." "I loved the life we had," he roared, stepping closer, his eyes wild. "Not this, not some kid I never asked for tying me down when I'm still trying to figure things out. You should have known better." He stared at her, his chest heaving, then turned away, his voice dropping to a low, bitter growl. "I can't do this, Kylie. I won't raise a kid I don't want. You need to leave. The room spun, the air sucked out of it by his command. Leave, she echoed, barely audible. This is our home, Nathan. Not anymore, he said, his back to her as he gripped the doorframe. Go stay with your parents, figure it out. I don't care, just go. Kylie stumbled through the next few days in a daze, her world unraveling thread by thread. Nathan's rejection had left her hollow, but a flicker of hope drove her to seek allies in the only place she could think of, his parents. Surely Harold and Ellen, with their old-school values and pride in family legacy, would see the worth of the life she carried. She clung to the idea that they'd stand by her, maybe even talk some sense into Nathan. So, with her heart in her throat and her belly just beginning to show, she drove to their sprawling house on the edge of town, the one with the wraparound porch and the workshop out back, where Harold still tinkered with wood scraps. The late morning air was crisp as she climbed the steps, her knock echoing against the heavy oak door. Ellen answered, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, her expression unreadable beneath the faint lines etched by years of stern resolve. Kylie, she said, her voice flat, offering no warmth as she stepped aside. Come in, then. Inside, the living room smelled of polished wood and faint cigar smoke, a testament to Harold's presence. He sat in his worn leather armchair, a newspaper spread across his lap, his sharp eyes lifting to meet hers as she entered. Kylie took a shaky breath, smoothing her dress over her stomach, and launched into the words she'd rehearsed on the drive over. I know things are a mess with Nathan right now, she began, her voice trembling but determined. But I'm pregnant. Your grandchild. I thought you should know. I need some support. I thought maybe you could talk to him, help him see this isn't the end, but a beginning. The silence that followed was suffocating. Harold folded his newspaper with deliberate slowness, his thick fingers creasing the edges, while Ellen stood by the mantel, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, Harold spoke, his gravelly voice cutting through the stillness. Pregnant, huh? And you think that's our problem? Kylie blinked, caught off guard. I thought you'd care, she stammered. It's your family too. Ellen let out a short, bitter laugh, her eyes narrowing. Family? You think popping out a kid makes you one of us? Nathan's made it clear he doesn't want this, and frankly, neither do we. We've got enough to deal with keeping the business afloat without some baby dragging us down. The words landed like a slap, and Kylie's hands instinctively cradled her belly, as if shielding the life inside from their scorn. But it's your grandchild, she said, her voice rising with desperation. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Harold leaned forward, his gaze hard and unyielding. It means you've made a mess, girl, and you're looking for us to clean it up. Nathan's got his head on straight. He knows what he can handle. You should have thought twice before letting this happen. Letting it happen? Kylie's voice broke, tears welling up as she stared at them. This wasn't just me. I didn't do this alone. Maybe not, Ellen cut in, her tone icy. But you're the one standing here, expecting us to fix it. We raised Nathan to know his limits. You'd do well to figure out yours. That day, Kylie felt the last threads of her strength unraveling, slipping through her fingers like sand. She rose from the floor where she'd crumpled, her legs unsteady beneath her, and staggered toward the mirror in their bedroom. The reflection staring back was a ghost of herself. Pale skin stretched taut over a weary face, eyes swollen and red-rimmed from hours of sobbing. Her hands drifted to her belly, the slight curve a quiet promise beneath her trembling fingers. Inside her grew a small life, a fragile symbol of the love she'd once believed in so fiercely. She was shattered, her heart a mosaic of jagged pieces, yet that tiny heartbeat tethered her to something unbroken. Touching her belly grounded her, a lifeline amid the wreckage. She pressed her palm there, feeling the warmth of her own skin, and whispered to the child within, I won't give up on you. It was a vow, soft but fierce, and it sparked a flicker of resolve in her chest. Nathan might have turned his back, his family might have cast her out, but this baby, her baby, deserved a mother who'd fight for them both. Heartbroken and a few months pregnant, Kylie made her decision. She couldn't stay in the suffocating shell of their apartment, surrounded by echoes of a life that had crumbled. With shaky hands, she packed a duffel bag, clothes, a few keepsakes, the ultrasound photo she'd tucked into her journal. Returning to her parents wasn't an option. The thought of facing their disappointed stares, the inevitable "we told you so" lurking in their silence, twisted her stomach. She'd sacrificed too much, burned too many bridges to crawl back now. Instead, she reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen, before dialing Mackenzie, her oldest friend from college. The line rang twice before Mackenzie's familiar voice cut through, bright and steady. "Kylie? Hey, what's up?" Kylie's throat tightened, but she forced the words out, her voice cracking as she spilled everything. Nathan's rejection, his family's cold dismissal, the baby she now carried alone. Mackenzie listened, her gasps, and murmured, "Oh my God," punctuating the flood of Kylie's confession. When the story finally ran dry, silence hung between them for a moment, thick with shock. "What are you going to do now?" Mackenzie asked, her tone gentle but laced with concern. Kylie leaned against the wall, staring at the packed bag by her feet. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice raw. "But I have to leave him. I need to find a job, figure things out. I can't just sit here doing nothing. I've got a baby to think about now." "Come stay with me," Mackenzie said without hesitation, her decisiveness cutting through Kylie's fog. "I've got the spare room, and you can take as long as you need to get back on your feet. You're not doing this alone, Kai." Gratitude swelled in Kylie's chest, a lump she couldn't swallow. "Thank you," she whispered, tears threatening again, but these were softer, born of relief. True to her word, Mackenzie pulled up in her beat-up hatchback, the engine idling as Kylie climbed in with her bag. The drive to Mackenzie's apartment was quiet, the hum of the road filling the space where words failed. When they arrived, Mackenzie hauled the duffel inside, tossing it onto the couch before turning to Kylie with a fierce hug. "We'll figure it out," she said, pulling back to meet Kylie's eyes. "You and that little one, you're stronger than you think." The next morning, Kylie woke with a resolve that burned brighter than her exhaustion. She couldn't afford to wallow, not with rent looming and a baby on the way. After a quick breakfast of toast and coffee at Mackenzie's small kitchen table, she pulled on a loose sweater to mask her growing belly and set out, determined to find work. She trudged through the streets of the small town, her sneakers scuffing against cracked sidewalks as she visited every shop, cafe, and restaurant she could find. At each stop, she plastered on a hopeful smile, clutching a hastily printed resume that listed her brief stint at Dutton & Sons and little else. But the rejections piled up like stones in her pockets. "Sorry, we're not hiring," said the barista at the coffee shop, barely glancing up from the espresso machine. "You don't have the experience we need," muttered the manager of a bustling diner, his eyes flickering to her midsection before darting away. "Come back when you've got something to offer," sneered the owner of a boutique, her tone sharp enough to cut. A pregnant woman with no real work history was a liability, an unspoken verdict that shadowed every polite smile and firm handshake. Despair crept closer with each door that closed, whispering that time was slipping away, that her meager savings wouldn't stretch far enough to keep her afloat. One grey afternoon, as a light drizzle misted the air, Kylie paused outside a car wash on the edge of town. The neon sign buzzed faintly, its letters spelling out "Help Wanted" in bold red. Water sluiced across the pavement, and the rhythmic hiss of pressure washers filled the air as workers scrubbed down a muddy pickup. She hesitated, her hand resting on her belly. The work would be hard, wet, grimy, and relentless, but it was a chance, a lifeline dangling just within reach. Swallowing her pride, she adjusted her sweater to conceal the slight bump and stepped inside the small office, where the tang of soap and gasoline hung heavy. A burly man in a stained polo shirt looked up from a clipboard, his brow furrowing as she approached. "Hi," Kylie said, forcing her voice steady. I saw the sign out front. Is the job still open? He sized her up, his gaze lingering a moment too long, but he nodded. Yeah, it's still open. You ever done this kind of work before? No, she admitted, meeting his eyes. But I'm a fast learner, and I'll work hard. I need this. He grunted, scribbling something on his clipboard. It's minimum wage, long hours, and you'll be on your feet all day. Start tomorrow, 7 sharp. We'll see if you can keep up. I will, she said quickly, relief flooding her chest. Thank you. I'll be here. She walked out into the drizzle, a small victory warming her against the chill. It wouldn't be easy. Her back would ache, her hands would blister. But she'd do it for her child, for the future she refused to let slip away. That evening, sprawled across the narrow guest bed in Mackenzie's apartment, Kylie stared at the cracked ceiling, her mind tracing the jagged turns her life had taken. The hum of traffic filtered through the window, a distant lullaby as she rested a hand on her belly, feeling the faint flutter of movement beneath her skin. Everything had flipped upside down in a heartbeat. Nathan's love, her place in his family, the dreams they'd woven together. All ashes now. But she wouldn't give up. The baby inside her was a spark, a reason to keep going, and tomorrow she'd step into the muck of the car wash with her head high. The car wash was a far cry from the dreams Kylie had once nurtured. Visions of a cozy home, a thriving family business, a life stitched with love and purpose. Now it was her lifeline, the only thread keeping her from sinking after Nathan's betrayal and the collapse of everything she'd planned. Tears wouldn't mend her broken world, she'd cried enough to know that. Action was her only way forward, and so she steeled herself, slipping into a faded uniform stained with cleaning fluid, her legs already aching before the day began, her heart a lead weight in her chest. The work was brutal. Her back throbbed from hours of bending over hoods and scrubbing tires, her hands trembling with exhaustion as she gripped the sponge. She tried her hardest, but her movements were slow, clumsy, unpracticed hands fumbling with hoses and brushes. Each car she finished drained her further, sapping the last reserves of her strength. The first customers didn't help. Their mocking smirks and pointed fingers followed her as she struggled with a muddy SUV, their whispers cutting deeper than the blazing sun overhead. She kept her head down, willing herself to ignore the sting of their judgment, but their gazes seared into her like brands. Her co-workers were worse. The crew, mostly men hardened by years of labour, didn't bother hiding their disdain. They were used to the grind, their muscled arms wielding pressure washers with ease, and they couldn't fathom why a pregnant woman had stumbled into their world. "Pick up the pace, princess," one jeered as she fumbled a bucket, suds sloshing onto her sneakers. "What's a girl like you even doing here?" Another snorted, his laugh coarse as he hosed down a sedan. Their sarcasm grated, each barb a reminder of her vulnerability, but she clenched her jaw and kept going, her teeth gritted against the pain shooting up her spine. By midday, she was a husk, legs wobbling, arms leaden, sweat mixing with the grime on her skin. She could barely stand, swaying as she dragged a rag across a windshield, but she refused to collapse. The day stretched endlessly before her, a gauntlet of soap and steel, and yet she pushed through, driven by a stubborn will to prove she could endure. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the last car rolled out, she stood there, drenched and depleted but unbroken. She'd survived her first shift, a grueling, unglamorous victory that whispered she could face anything. Back at Mackenzie's quiet apartment, the silence enveloped her like a balm. Mackenzie was pulling a night shift at the hospital, leaving the space empty save for the hum of the fridge. Kylie shuffled to the kitchen, her body screaming with every step, and pulled out a container of leftover pasta from the night before. She sank into a chair at the table, staring at the cold food, her stomach too knotted to feel hunger. Still, she forced a few bites down, each swallow a mechanical act of self-preservation. She needed the strength for herself, for the baby. A hot shower came next, the steam rising as water cascaded over her aching frame. It sluiced away the day's dirt and sweat, soothing her sore muscles. But the sadness clung like a second skin, unyielding to the heat. She lingered under the spray, her hand resting on her belly, feeling the faint curve that held her reason to keep fighting. When she finally crawled into bed, the sheets cool against her flushed skin, sleep eluded her. Her mind churned with memories of Nathan's warm laughter, their late-night dreams, the life they'd promised each other. How had it all crumbled so fast? Why had he turned his back on her, on their child? The questions looped endlessly, a storm of doubt and longing, until exhaustion finally pulled her under. She slipped into a deep, dreamless sleep, the weight of the day fading into shadow. Tomorrow loomed, a new day at the car wash, another test of her resilience. The next day hit the car wash like a tidal wave, an unrelenting flood of vehicles that kept the crew scrambling from dawn into the afternoon. The air buzzed with the roar of pressure washers and the shouts of workers, the line of cars snaking out onto the street with no end in sight. The familiar tang of chemicals and wet rubber hung thick, sharper than usual, prickling Kylie's nose and turning her stomach. A cruel twist of her pregnancy-heightened senses. Her back screamed with every bend, her hands raw from gripping the sponge, but she pushed through car after car, until at last she polished the final muddy sedan, in her queue. Exhausted, she stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow, and allowed herself a fleeting break, leaning against a stack of tires to catch her breath. That's when she saw it. A sleek black S-Class Mercedes, its glossy finish shimmering like liquid obsidian, rolled up to one of the stations with a purr so smooth it cut through the chaos. The car gleamed as if it had just glided off the assembly line, not a speck of dust daring to mar its surface. Kylie's tired eyes lingered on it, a stark contrast to the grimy pickups and dented hatchbacks she'd been wrestling with all day. Then the driver's door swung open and a man stepped out, his presence pulling her gaze like a magnet. Tall and fit, he carried himself with an easy authority, his tailored business suit, a crisp navy pinstripe, hugging his frame as if custom-made. His hair was silver, neatly combed, and his face, etched with lines that spoke of experience, suggested he was around 60. He adjusted his cufflinks with a flick of his wrist, exuding a quiet confidence that seemed out of place amid the suds and grit. What caught her off guard, though, was what he did next. Instead of handing the keys to one of the workers and retreating to the waiting area like every other customer, he reached into the back seat, pulled out a microfiber cloth, and began wiping down the car himself. His movements were meticulous, almost reverent, as he traced the cloth along the hood, buffing an already spotless surface. Kylie watched, puzzled, her aching legs forgotten for a moment. Why would someone with a car that pristine, and clearly the means to afford it, bother with a car wash, let alone clean it himself? Her co-worker Jake, a lanky guy with a perpetual smirk, sidled up beside her, wiping his hands on his apron. "Check out Mr. Fancy," he muttered, nodding toward the man. "Bet he's just here to show off. Probably doesn't even trust us with that beauty." Kylie didn't respond, her eyes still fixed on the stranger. There was something odd about him. Not just the suit or the car, but the way he moved, deliberate and unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. The relentless hum of the car wash pulsed around Kylie as she scrubbed down the minivan, her arms moving on autopilot despite the ache gnawing at her muscles. The day's chaos had barely let up, and the sharp sting of chemicals still prickled her nose, but she'd found a rhythm, slow and steady, one car at a time. She'd just finished hosing off the last of the dirt when her gaze drifted back to the black S-Class Mercedes, its pristine shine still commanding attention amid the grit. The older man in the suit was there, circling his car with that same microfiber cloth, polishing the already flawless hood with a care that bordered on obsession. Kylie wiped her hands on her damp apron, a faint smirk tugging at her lips as she watched him. Curiosity got the better of her, and before she could stop herself, she called out, her voice half joking over the hiss of the washers. "You know, if you keep wiping that thing down, we're going to be out of a job here. What's the point of a car wash if it's already sparkling?" The man paused, his cloth hovering mid-swipe, and turned to face her. Up close, she could see the faint creases around his eyes, the silver in his hair catching the sunlight. He didn't bristle at her remark. Instead, a slow, amused grin spread across his face, softening the stern lines of his features. "Fair point," he said, his voice deep and gravelly, carrying a hint of a chuckle. "But this isn't my car. I just drive it. Boss likes it spotless. Keeps me on my toes." Kylie raised an eyebrow, leaning against the minivan's fender to give her legs a break. "A driver, huh? Figures. That's too nice a ride for a car wash like this. What's your boss do? Own half the town?" "Something like that," he replied, folding the cloth with precision and tucking it into his pocket. "He's a businessman, big deals. Keeps me busy hauling him around to meetings and golf courses. Name's Henry, by the way." "Kylie," she said, offering a small nod. "Well, Henry, you're doing a better job than most of us here. Maybe you should take my spot. I could use the day off." He laughed, a warm, rumbling sound that cut through the din. "Tempting, but I think I'll stick to the driving. You look like you've got this under control." They fell into an easy back and forth, the conversation a welcome reprieve from the grind. Henry had a dry wit, tossing out quips about his boss's quirks, like the time he'd demanded the car be waxed during a thunderstorm. That made Kylie crack a genuine smile, her first in days. She told him about the guy who'd driven through earlier with a backseat full of yapping chihuahuas, and Henry shook his head, muttering, "People are something else." As he finished his inspection of the Mercedes ready to climb back in, Henry's gaze flicked downward, landing on the slight curve of Kylie's belly beneath her oversized uniform. His brow furrowed slightly, and he tilted his head. "Hang on a sec," he said, his tone shifting from playful to curious. "You pregnant, or just been skipping the gym lately?" Kylie hesitated, then let out a soft laugh, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. "Pregnant," she admitted, her smile bittersweet. "Few months along now." Henry's expression sobered, his eyes narrowing as he studied her, really studied her, like he was seeing past the grime and the bravado. "Pregnant," he repeated almost to himself. Then, more firmly, "What are you doing out here then? Working yourself ragged at a place like this? You should be home resting up, getting ready to be a mom." The words hit her like a gust of cold wind, and she swallowed hard, her throat tightening. Images flashed through her mind unbidden, Nathan's warm smile in the college courtyard, their wedding day under the chapel's stained glass, the life they'd dreamed of crumbling into his shouted rejection. She saw the Duttons' icy stairs, the packed duffel bag, the endless line of cars she'd washed to keep from drowning. Her chest ached with the weight of it all, but she forced her voice steady. "It's complicated," she said, looking away. "I don't really have that option right now." Before Henry could respond, a harsh voice sliced through the air. "Kylie, what the hell are you doing?" She flinched, turning to see Rick, the car wash manager, storming toward her. His greasy hair stuck to his forehead, and his scowl deepened as he jabbed a finger at the growing line of cars. "You're standing around chatting while we've got a damn pile-up. Get your ass moving." Kylie straightened, heat creeping up her neck. "I just finished one, Rick. I was—" "Save it," he snapped, cutting her off. "I don't pay you to flap your gums. Move." Henry stepped forward, his posture shifting from relaxed to rigid, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Easy, pal. We were just talking. No need to make a scene about it." Rick wheeled on him, his face reddening. "Who the hell are you to tell me how to run my shop? You're just a driver. Mind your own damn business and take your fancy car somewhere else." Henry didn't flinch, his gaze locking onto Rick's. "I'm a customer," he said evenly, "and she's your worker. A little respect wouldn't kill you." "Respect?" Rick barked a laugh, stepping closer, his bulk looming over Henry. "I don't need lessons from some old geezer in a suit. Back off before I—" He didn't finish. In a blur of motion, Rick lunged, aiming a clumsy shove at Henry's chest. But Henry moved faster. Sidestepping with a grace that belied his age, he caught Rick's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and drove him down to his knees in one fluid motion. Rick yelped, his free arm flailing as Henry pinned him there, his grip unrelenting. The manager's face contorted in pain, his bravado evaporating as he squirmed against the hold. "Stop! Let go!" Rick gasped, his voice pitching into a whine. "You're crazy!" Henry leaned in close, his voice low and deliberate. "You should have had some respect for her, for me, for anyone who walks through here. Treat your people like that again, and you'll wish I'd stayed a driver." He released Rick with a sharp push, sending him sprawling onto the wet pavement. The manager scrambled to his feet, clutching his arm, his eyes wild with humiliation and rage. "You're done, Kylie!" he screamed, his voice cracking as he pointed at her. "Fired! Get the hell out of here now!" Kylie stood frozen, her heart pounding as the words sank in. The other workers gawked, the hum of the car wash fading into a stunned silence. Henry adjusted his suit jacket unfazed and turned to her, his expression softening. "You okay, kid?" She nodded mutely, her mind racing. The air in the car wash still crackled with tension as Henry glanced at Kylie, her face pale and her hands trembling at her sides. Rick's shouts faded into the background as he stormed off, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Henry adjusted his tie, his calm unshaken, and turned to her. "Come on," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Get in the car." Kylie blinked, her mind still reeling, but she nodded numbly and followed him to the sleek Mercedes. The passenger door clicked open, and she slid into the leather seat, the coolness of it seeping through her damp uniform. Henry climbed in beside her, started the engine with a low rumble, and pulled away from the chaos of the car wash without a backward glance. The world outside blurred past, streets lined with faded storefronts, the hum of traffic, while inside, the silence grew thick, broken only by the soft hum of the car. She didn't notice the tears at first, not until they spilled hot down her cheeks, her breath hitching as she stared out the window. Henry caught the glint of them in the corner of his eye and eased the car to a stop on a quiet stretch of road, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. He stepped out, his polished shoes scuffing the dirt, and walked around to her side. The door swung open, and he crouched down to her level, his tall frame folding with an ease that spoke of years of discipline. His hand reached for hers, warm and calloused, and he held it firmly, grounding her. "Kylie," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I'm sorry you've had to go through so much. You don't deserve this mess. Tell me your story. What brought you here?" She looked into his eyes, steady, weathered, carrying a depth she couldn't quite place, and the dam broke. Words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. She told him everything. Her voice cracked when she described the car wash, the only lifeline she'd found, and how even that had just slipped away. "I just wanted to give my baby a chance," she finished, wiping her face with her sleeve. "That's all I've got left." Henry listened, his grip on her hand unwavering, his expression unreadable but intent. When she fell silent, he squeezed her hand once more and stood. They drove on in quiet, the town's edges giving way to open fields and scattered trees, until they reached the outskirts where a modest trailer park nestled against a line of pines. He pulled up to a weathered trailer, its aluminum siding dulled by time but sturdy, a small porch tacked onto the front. "This is my humble abode," Henry said, cutting the engine. He led her inside, the door creaking as it swung open to reveal a cramped but tidy space. The interior was a patchwork of a life lived hard and full, faded military patches pinned to a corkboard, a shelf of dog-eared books on strategy and history, framed photos of a younger Henry in uniform beside men with stern faces and desert backdrops. A worn rifle case leaned against the wall, and a folded American flag sat atop a dresser, its edges frayed but reverently placed. Kylie's eyes roamed the room, piecing together the clues. "You were in the military," she said, more a realization than a question, her fingers brushing a photo of Henry in fatigues, a helicopter looming behind him. He nodded, leaning against the counter as he watched her. "Half my life," he confirmed, his tone matter-of-fact. "Joined up at 18, retired a few years back. Saw a lot, lost a lot. Keeps you grounded, though, teaches you what matters." She turned to him, still processing the man before her, when he reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. He opened it, revealing a stack of cash, crisp bills bound with a rubber band, and handed it to her. "You're staying here," he said, his voice firm but kind. "As long as you need. No rent, no bills. Take this, get what you need from the store, food, clothes, whatever. All I want is for you to take care of that kid of yours." Kylie stared at the money, then at him, her mouth parting in disbelief. "Henry, I can't take this. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips, but he didn't say anything. He grabbed his keys, heading for the door. "I've got to run an errand for the boss," he said. "Make yourself at home. I'll check in tomorrow." And then he was gone, the trailer settling into a quiet hum as Kylie stood there. Henry was an enigma, a driver with a soldier's past, a stranger who'd stepped into her chaos with a lifeline she couldn't fathom. She sank onto the worn couch, her mind spinning, but beneath the disbelief, a fragile hope took root. That evening, after Henry left, Kylie sat on the trailer's worn couch, the envelope of cash still clutched in her hands. She knew she couldn't keep Mackenzie in the dark, not after disappearing so abruptly. Picking up her phone, she dialed her friend's number, her thumb hovering over the call button before pressing it. Mackenzie answered on the second ring, her voice bright but tinged with worry. "Kylie, where are you? I got home and you were gone. Everything okay?" "I'm fine," Kylie said quickly, forcing a steadiness into her tone. "I'm staying with a distant relative for a bit. Something came up and I didn't want to worry you. I'll explain more later, okay?" There was a pause, and Kylie could almost hear Mackenzie's skepticism through the line. "A relative? Kai, you sure you're all right? You sound off." "I promise I'm good," Kylie lied, her eyes drifting to the military patches on Henry's corkboard. She didn't want to spill Henry's kindness, or risk betraying his trust, until she understood it herself. "Just needed a change. I'll call you soon." Mackenzie relented, though her "take care" carried a note of doubt. Kylie hung up, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and set about settling into the trailer. It became her new rhythm, days unfolding in the small, sturdy space, surrounded by Henry's relics of a life she could only guess at. He'd visit sporadically, sometimes every few days, sometimes once a week, pulling up in the Mercedes with a quiet nod and a bag of groceries. "Take care of yourself," he'd say, his tone firm, almost an order. "No heavy lifting, no stress. You hear me?" Kylie nodded, grateful but restless. With little to do beyond resting, she turned inward, craving purpose. One afternoon, she borrowed Mackenzie's library card, via a quick, vague text, and checked out a stack of books: biology, early childhood education, anything to rekindle the studies she'd abandoned for Nathan. She spread them across the trailer's tiny table, poring over pages in the dim light, her pencil scratching notes as her belly grew rounder. It wasn't much, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Still, Henry remained a mystery. She'd pegged him as a kind old man, a good Samaritan who'd taken pity on her plight. But the cash, the trailer, his quiet intensity, it nagged at her. Was she naive to trust him? Should she be wary? The questions churned until one crisp afternoon, when he stopped by with a sack of apples and a thermos of coffee, she mustered her courage. She'd rehearsed it in her head, determined to ease into it smoothly. "Henry," she started, pouring him a mug as he settled into the armchair. "You've been amazing to me. I don't even know how to thank you. But can I ask why? Why help me like this?" He took the coffee, his silver hair catching the light as he leaned back, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Knew you'd get around to that eventually. he said, his voice warm with amusement. Can't blame you. Be pretty strange, some old guy swooping in out of nowhere to play hero. Kylie sat across from him, cradling her own mug, her heart thudding. Yeah, a little, she admitted, offering a small smile. I just want to understand. Who are you, really? Henry set his mug down, his gaze drifting to the photos on the wall, a younger version of himself, stern and proud in uniform. He exhaled slowly, the sound heavy with years. All right, he said. Guess I owe you that much. He began, his voice steady but laced with something softer, something raw. I was young once. Too young. Too restless. Joined the military at 18, chasing action, adventure, all that nonsense. Met a girl along the way, sweet, tough, full of life. She got pregnant and I bolted. Didn't want to settle down, didn't want the weight of it. Thought I needed to see the world first, prove something to myself. Kylie listened, her breath catching as he continued. I got what I wanted. Medals, missions, years of stories. But when the dust settled, I looked back and saw what I'd lost. She was gone, raised our daughter alone. That was 40 years ago. My girl's out there now, 40 herself, probably with kids of her own. I don't even know where, just that I missed it all. Too damn proud, too ashamed to face it. He paused, his eyes meeting hers, steady but glistening faintly. That day at the car wash, you reminded me of her, of my wife, back when I left her, pregnant, fighting to hold it together. I saw you standing there, all grit and no quit, and it hit me like a freight train. The words sank into Kylie deep and aching, stirring a swell of emotion she couldn't name. She saw the parallels, her own abandonment, Nathan's retreat, and yet here was Henry, a man shaped by regret, offering her what he couldn't give his own family. Her hand rested on her belly, the baby's gentle kick a quiet echo of his story. I'm no saint, he added, his voice gruff as he picked up his mug again. Just an old fool trying to balance the scales a little. You and that kid. You're my chance to do it right. Kylie swallowed the lump in her throat, tears brimming but not falling. Thank you, she whispered, the weight of his confessions settling over her. Henry wasn't just a kind stranger. He was a man carrying 40 years of ghosts, and somehow she'd become his redemption. It was overwhelming, humbling, and in that small trailer, surrounded by his past, she felt the fragile threads of her future begin to knit together. For the next 6 months, Kylie poured herself into her studies, the trailer's small table becoming her sanctuary. Textbooks on business and management lay scattered beside notebooks filled with her neat, determined scrawl, a lifeline to the future she was clawing back. Henry was her quiet guardian, ensuring she had everything she needed, groceries stacked in the fridge, a second-hand rocking chair for the corner, even a battered laptop he'd scavenged so she could research online. Focus on that baby and your books, he'd say, his voice gruff but warm. Nothing else matters right now. She saw it in his eyes, the way he lingered when he dropped off supplies. He was cleansing an old wound, stitching up a guilt that had festered for decades. And in that shared space, a bond grew, fragile at first, then solid, like father and daughter finding each other across a chasm of years. They'd sit together some evenings, Henry sipping coffee while she quizzed herself on financial terms, and their talks deepened. One night, as the crickets chirped outside, he asked about her parents. You ever think about calling them? Letting them know you're okay? His tone was casual, but his eyes searched hers. Kylie set her pencil down, staring at the grain of the table. Funny thing is, I'm kind of like you were, she said, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Too embarrassed to face them. I walked away from everything they wanted for me, college, their rules, and look where it got me. I can't just show up now, tail between my legs. Henry nodded, understanding flickering in his gaze. Pride's a hell of a thing, he muttered. Keeps us stuck till we're ready to let it go. Life settled into that rhythm. Studies, quiet moments, Henry's steady presence, until one chilly night, 6 months in, when everything shifted. Henry was on the road, driving toward the airport to pick up his boss, the Mercedes slicing through the dark. Kylie, heavy with her nearing due date, felt a twinge deep in her core, sharper than the usual aches. She paced the trailer, breathing through it, but when the twinges turned to waves, she grabbed her phone and dialed him, her voice tight. "Henry, you coming home anytime soon? I think the baby's coming." His reply was instant, no hesitation. "Hang on, kid. I'm turning around." She heard the squeal of tires through the line as he abandoned his route, the airport forgotten, and sped back to her. Hours later, in the sterile glow of a hospital room, Kylie gave birth to a strong, squalling baby boy, his cries piercing the air like a triumph. She held him close, his tiny fist curling around her finger, and whispered promises into his soft, dark hair. Henry had been there, pacing the waiting room, until the nurses shooed him out with assurances she'd be fine. On the day she was set to be discharged, he was supposed to pick her up, but the clock ticked past the hour, and she wondered if traffic had snagged him. Then the Mercedes rolled into the hospital lot, and Kylie's breath caught as the back doors opened. Her parents stepped out, her mother in a stiff wool coat, her father's familiar scowl softened by time. Henry climbed out after them, his suit rumpled, a sheepish grin on his face. Kylie's heart stuttered, her arms tightening around her son as tears sprang to her eyes. They crossed the lobby to her, and when they saw her, pale, exhausted, cradling their grandson, she broke. Sobs shook her as they closed the distance, no words needed. Her mother's arms enveloped her first, then her father's, their embrace awkward, but real. The ride back to the trailer was silent, the baby dozing in his car seat, save for Henry's attempts to lighten the air. "Kid's got lungs like a drill sergeant," he quipped, glancing at them in the rear view. "Gonna keep you all on your toes." At the trailer, her mother spoke, her voice tentative. "You can come home, Kylie. We'll take care of you both." Her father nodded, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Kylie looked at them, then at her son, then at Henry leaning against the counter, watching quietly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice steady despite the tears, "for not listening when you warned me. I thought I knew better. But I'm okay here. I'll get by. I have to." Her parents exchanged a glance, understanding dawning in their eyes. They were still conservative, still a touch cold. Her mother's hug had been stiff, her father's words few, but they cared in their way. "We're here if you need us," her mother said, and her father added a gruff, "Take care of that boy." They thanked Henry, their gratitude clipped but sincere, and blessed Kylie with a quick prayer before climbing back into the car. As their car away, she watched them go, a weight lifting yet a tether remaining. Inside the trailer, Kylie turned to Henry, her son nestled in her arms. "I want you to name him," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's an honor for everything you've done." Henry froze, his eyes widening, then softening as he looked at the baby. He cleared his throat, the gruffness failing to hide his emotion. "Victor," he said finally, the name rolling out like a quiet vow. "Means winner. Suits him. He's already beat the odds." Kylie smiled, tears brimming again as she looked down at Victor, then at Henry. She could go home, let her family cocoon her in safety, but leaving Henry, the one who'd stood by her when no one else had, felt like abandoning a piece of her own redemption. He'd given her a chance to rebuild, and she'd stay, forging a life for her and Victor in the shadow of his quiet strength. Victor grew like a weed, his chubby legs carrying him from crawling to toddling in what felt like a blink. Kylie threw herself into her studies with the same ferocity, the trailer's small table now cluttered with business books and a laptop humming late into the night. Her hard work paid off when she landed a remote gig consulting for small businesses, her knack for organization and quiet determination shining through. Bit by bit, her professionalism sharpened. Phone calls turned into contracts, and soon she was advising clients from the trailer's makeshift office, a corner carved out amid Victor's toys and Henry's military relics. Henry pitched in whenever he could, babysitting Victor with a gruff tenderness, the boy's giggles filling the space as Grandpa Henry hoisted him onto his shoulders. 3 years slipped by in a blur of milestones. Kylie's consulting gig blossomed into her own company, K Solutions, run from the trailer park with a logo she'd designed herself. Victor, now a spirited 3-year-old with a mop of dark curls, chattered non-stop, his favourite word, Grandpa, as he trailed Henry around the lot. Henry, ever the steady presence, had become her rock, their bond a quiet, unspoken pact forged through late-night talks and shared battles. That year, Henry was turning 63, and Kylie wanted to mark it with something special. She booked a table at the fanciest restaurant in town, a place with white tablecloths, flickering candles, and a menu she'd saved up for months to afford. She'd told Henry it was a treat for all he'd done, and he'd grumbled about the fuss but agreed, smoothing his best suit for the occasion. On the night of his birthday, they arrived together, Kylie in a simple but elegant dress, Victor clutching her hand, and Henry carrying the boy with a proud grin. They approached their reserved table, but as they neared, Henry slowed, his brows knitting together. A couple, around 40, well-dressed and poised, was already seated there, sipping wine and chatting softly. Henry shifted Victor in his arms, glancing at Kylie. "Must have mixed up the tables," he muttered, his voice tinged with confusion. Kylie didn't answer, her face glowing with a secretive, radiant smile. Henry turned back to the couple, and as they stood to greet him, recognition hit him like a thunderclap. The woman's features, sharp cheekbones, warm brown eyes, mirrored his own, aged but unmistakable. His daughter, Beatrice. Beside her stood a man with a kind face and a firm handshake. Her husband, his son-in-law. Henry's breath caught, his knees weakening as he clutched Victor tighter. "Beatrice," he rasped, disbelief trembling in his voice. She stepped forward, extending a hand with a tentative smile. "Hi, Dad. I'm Beatrice." The dam broke. Tears streamed down Henry's weathered cheeks as he set Victor down and pulled her into a crushing hug, his broad shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," he choked out, over and over, the words spilling like a confession 40 years in the making. "I'm so damn sorry for everything." Beatrice hugged him back, her own eyes glistening, and when they parted, Henry turned to her husband, gripping his hand with a vigour that belied his age. "Good to meet you," he said, voice thick. "Real good." The evening unfolded like a dream, cosy, warm, and brimming with a quiet joy. They settled around the table, Victor perched on Henry's lap, and the conversation flowed like a river long dammed. Beatrice shared her life, her job as a teacher, her 2 kids, a boy and a girl, who'd stayed home with a sitter. Her husband Tom chimed in with dry humour, recounting their chaotic family road trips. Henry soaked it in, hanging on every word, his laughter mingling with Victor's chatter. Kylie watched, her heart full, and when Beatrice asked how this came to be, she fessed up. "I tracked her down," Kylie admitted, twirling her fork. "Told her how much you wanted to see her, Henry, but couldn't face it. She was brave enough to say yes." Beatrice smiled across the table. "I'd wondered about you for years, Dad. When Kylie called, I knew it was time." Kylie and Henry slipped back into their rhythm, the trailer park humming with the quiet cadence of their days. Kylie's company, K Solutions, was gaining traction. Her client list grew, and she hired a handful of remote employees, managing them from the trailer's cramped but cozy office corner. Victor thrived. A whirlwind of energy at 8 years old, his dark curls bouncing as he raced around the lot. Henry chasing him with mock growls of, "Grandpa's gonna get you!" 5 years sped by, a blur of milestones. Victor's first soccer goal, Kylie's first big corporate contract, Henry's steady presence anchoring them through it all. They were a family now, not just in name, but in the deep, unspoken ways that mattered. One crisp autumn afternoon, Kylie burst through the trailer door, her face alight with a grin she couldn't contain. Henry looked up from the table where he was helping Victor with a puzzle, his coffee mug paused mid-sip. "What's got you beaming like that?" he asked, eyebrow arched. "We're moving," she announced, setting her bag down with a triumphant thud. "I bought a house. A real one, Henry. No more trailer. We've got a yard, bedrooms, the works." Henry blinked, setting the mug down slowly as the words sank in. "A house?" he echoed, disbelief giving way to a wide, crinkly smile. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," she said, laughing as Victor whooped and tackled her legs. "Closing's done, keys are mine, we're out of here in a few days." Henry stood, pulling her into a bear hug, his voice thick. "Damn proud of you, kid. Damn proud." Victor wedged between them, giggling, and in that moment their little trio felt invincible. A family forged through grit and grace, stepping into a new chapter. A few days before the move, Kylie drove to the new house. A modest 2-story with a wraparound porch and a lawn begging for Victor's soccer ball. The furniture truck was already there, its back gaping open as workers hauled out boxes and pieces. She paced the driveway, phone pressed to her ear, hashing out a deal with a partner. "Yeah, we can shift the timeline," she said, her voice crisp and confident. "Just keep me posted." One of the movers approached, hefting a grey sofa on his shoulder. "Hey, where's this going?" he called, his tone casual. Kylie glanced over, pointing to the living room corner near the window. "Right there, thanks," she said, then returned to her call. The man nodded and shuffled off, but something about his gait, the way he tilted his head, snagged her attention. She squinted, her breath catching as recognition hit. Nathan. He froze mid-step, staring at her, the sofa still balanced on his shoulder as her voice carried on, oblivious for a moment. She wrapped up the call. "Sorry, gotta go, furniture's coming in," and hung up, slipping the phone into her pocket. Turning fully, she met his gaze, her expression cool and unreadable. "Something wrong?" she asked, her tone clipped. Nathan lowered the sofa to the ground, a hesitant smile breaking across his face as he waved a hand. "Kylie, you don't recognize me." She crossed her arms, her hazel eyes steady. "I recognized you the second I saw you," she said flatly. "What's the problem?" He faltered, his smile flickering. "Well, I'm Nathan, remember? We were a family once." "So what?" she replied, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The air hung heavy between them, his words dangling unanswered. When he didn't respond, she turned on her heel and walked back toward the house, her steps deliberate, leaving him standing there, dumbstruck. Inside, she leaned against the kitchen counter, her pulse thudding in her ears. Nathan, older now, lines etched deeper into his face, hauling furniture for a living, was a ghost from a life she'd buried. She didn't owe him her time, her explanations, or her forgiveness. Nathan, sweat beading on his brow, wrestled a wooden dresser through the front door, his eyes scanning around in search of the little boy he noticed when he first arrived. Then he saw him. Victor was kicking a soccer ball against the porch steps, his movements quick and sure. Nathan's breath hitched as recognition jolted through him. The boy's features were a mirror of his own. He set the dresser down, wiping his hands on his jeans, and took a tentative step forward, his voice catching. "Hey, kid!" "Not so fast, mister." Henry's voice cut through, sharp and unyielding. He stepped out from the garage, his broad frame filling the space between Nathan and Victor, his silver hair glinting in the light. His eyes, hard with a protective fire, locked onto Nathan's. "You don't get to waltz in here like that. You gave up any right to see him the day you told her to leave." Nathan faltered, his hands rising in a weak protest. He's my—" "No," Henry snapped, his tone low but final, a soldier's command. "He's hers. You don't get to claim him now." Victor glanced up, curious but oblivious, and Henry softened, turning to him. "Go help your mum with the boxes, Vic." The boy nodded, darting inside, leaving Nathan stranded under Henry's unwavering glare, the weight of his past, a barrier he'd never cross. Kylie stood in the kitchen, the clatter of furniture being set down fading into the background. A realization settled over her like a quiet tide. Nathan, once so consumed by ambition, insisting they wait for stability before building a life, stood out there, still tethered to dreams that hadn't materialized. Here he was, hauling sofas for a paycheck while she'd turned her scraps into something solid. The irony wasn't lost on her. It had come full circle, a poetic twist she hadn't seen coming. A surge of triumph pulsed through her, sharp and sweet. She wasn't the broken girl he'd asked to leave, scrambling to survive. She was victorious, right then, right there, in the home she'd bought with her own grit, surrounded by the life she'd forged. Victor's laughter echoed, Henry's steady voice guiding him, and her company's success hummed in the background of her mind. She exhaled, a small, fierce smile tugging at her lips, and stepped back into the sunlight, leaving him and the past exactly where they belonged. 5 years had woven themselves into the fabric of Kylie's life with a quiet, steady grace. The house she'd bought, a 2-story haven with its wide porch and sprawling yard, had become more than just a roof over their heads. It was home, alive with the patter of Victor's feet, now 13 and lanky, his dark curls perpetually tousled from soccer practice or impromptu wrestling matches with Henry. Henry, now 68, had settled into a slower rhythm, his days split between tinkering in the garage and doting on Victor. His silver hair had thinned, his hands more weathered, but his eyes held the same steady fire, softened by the years of reconciliation and the love he'd found in Kylie and Victor. One golden October afternoon, the three of them gathered in the backyard, the air crisp with the promise of fall. They fell into an easy silence, the kind that only comes from years of knowing each other's edges and quiet places. "Hard to believe it's been 8 years since the trailer," she said, her voice soft, almost to herself. Henry glanced over, his gaze knowing. "Feels like yesterday sometimes. You've come a hell of a way, Kai." "So have you," she replied, meeting his eyes. "Couldn't have done it without you, you know." He waved her off, gruff as ever. "Nonsense. You were a fighter from the start. I just gave you a nudge." Victor abandoned his ball, flopping onto the grass beside Henry's chair. "What about me? I helped too, right?" Kylie laughed, ruffling his hair as she stepped down to join them. "You're the whole reason, kiddo. Kept me going when I didn't think I could." They sat there as dusk crept in, the yard glowing with fireflies Victor chased with a jar, Henry's low chuckles mingling with the rustle of leaves. Kylie watched them, her son, her rock, and felt the threads of their lives knit tighter. Later, as Victor dashed inside to grab a snack and Henry stoked a small fire pit, Kylie lingered on the porch, the stars winking awake above. Henry joined her, settling into the swing beside her, the creak of it a familiar hymn. "You ever think about where we'd be if you hadn't stopped at that car wash?" he asked, his voice low. "Every day," she admitted, smiling faintly. "But I wouldn't change a thing." He nodded a silent agreement. The fire crackled, the night deepened, and Kylie knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones, that this was her finish line, not an end, but a beginning, stretching out into a future they'd write together.